So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Dora. I'm one of the organizers of Kesher. And I just want to say a few words about Kesher for those who are joining us for the first time. So normally what we do is to introduce Jewish communities from all over the world. We learn about their history, their heritage, their culture, and also their present-day situation. And there are two other themes that we often work with. One is introducing Jewish-themed books. So this is what we call the Kesher Book Club. And we also lately have been offering Jewish trips in real life. So today is a little bit of a combination of these two things because we are hosting a Kesher Book Club in which we're going to introduce Ira Vesli-Kittmacher's book, which I'm going to, now that I managed to pronounce the name properly, I still want to read the full title as it should be. So we're going to learn about his book, Monsters and Miracles, Horror, Heroes, and the Holocaust. And this is very special because it's going to be also the theme of a trip that is being planned by our partners at Gerulita, and we are very happy to welcome for the second part of the presentation Daniel Gurevich, who is going to tell you how the trip is going to go that was inspired by Ira's book. So this is why we combined these two sessions in one. So now I'm going to pass the word to Ira. He's going to share about his book, and we will have a short Q&A afterwards. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And after that, we will host Danielle, who will share about the trip. So here we go. And thank you, Ira, for telling us about your book, and the stage is all yours.
Okay. Thank you, Dora and Sebastian, and thank you for hosting us today. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to try to keep this to about 45 minutes or so I can give Daniel enough time on the second half of this. Thank you again for letting me join with you and talk with you today. As Dora mentioned, this book is very special to me, Monsters and Miracles, Horror, Heroes, and the Holocaust. In part, I talk about my parents. My father was a Holocaust survivor who survived 5 concentration slave labor camps, the Warsaw Ghetto, a displaced persons camp in Munich, Germany, and he survived. The rest of his family did not. They were all killed during the Holocaust. So part of the book focuses on my father's experiences. My mother, so my father's name was Albert. My mother's name was Pearl, same last name as mine. And she saw what was happening. She was in the United States. She saw what was happening in Europe in World War II and felt she had to do something. And so she joined the US Navy. And so part of the book relates to that. And so even though part of the focus is on my parents, the overarching theme, as it says in the title of the book, I focus on the beliefs of the Jews, the Poles, the Germans, others in folklore, in supernatural types of topics. I'll explain what I mean by that in just a moment. And so that's the overarching theme of the book. Very briefly about me, you can see on the screen, I'm a retired senior federal executive. I held a senior job with the U.S. Department of Treasury in Washington, D.C. I've been a professor for decades, Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. and others. I've actually, this book is one of 6 that I've written. The others primarily focus on the United States and history and folklore of the United States. I do consulting work. I'm also an attorney. And my interests, as you can see, history, folklore, supernatural, horror, heroes, superhero stories, and movies. Okay. So why I wrote this book, you can see on the screen, to honor my mother and father, to breathe life into the times and spirits of those that were lost. And of course, there were millions upon millions lost, not just the estimated 6 million Jews who were lost, and that's a minimum number because we don't know how many babies were killed in World War II by the Nazis, but it's estimated that some 40 million people were killed by the Nazis in World War II. So just obviously a huge loss. And part of the book, I focus on this being a cautionary tale of similarities that I see between what was happening in the world back in the early 20th century, the 1920s to the 1940s, and what's happening today in the 2020s, the rise of Nazism, fascism, white nationalism, intolerance. And my main purpose, again, is my belief that we have to fully understand the beliefs of the Jews, the Poles, the Germans, and others on things like anti-Semitism, stereotypes, tenets of good and evil, angels and demons, folklore, miracles, monsters, heroes, superheroes, and I'll go through this in a little more detail as we go through the slides. So Daniel, who I'm working with obviously in co-designing this tour and co-leading the tour, we've timed this to coincide with the 85th anniversary of the Nazis invading Poland. They invaded September 1, 1939. So this will be the 85th anniversary. And I think it's easy for many of us to forget just how dire things were during World War II, because obviously the Allies won, the forces of good won in the end, but it could have gone a different direction. The Germans were very powerful. Many people were afraid that the Germans would win. And of course, the world would be a much worse place, unthinkable, if in fact they had won. I'm going to quickly show some photos of places that we'll be visiting on the tour. And of course, Daniel will spend more time talking about it. On days 1 and 2, we'll be exploring Warsaw. You can see I have a photo up here of the Warsaw Ghetto and the numbers of Jews and number that were killed. Again, my father and his family lived in the Warsaw Ghetto. They were forced out of Warsaw itself and lived in the ghetto before they were forced into concentration and slave labor camps, and before the rest of my father's family was completely lost. And on the right-hand side is a photo of Warsaw today. The numbers are staggering. At one time, prior to the Holocaust, the population of Warsaw, as far as I can tell, was roughly 300,000, 30% of the city's population, 10% of the Polish population. And estimates of the current Jewish population in Warsaw, they vary depending on which source you go to, but somewhere between 10 and 30,000. So just the loss, the huge loss, is staggering. On day 3 of the tour, we will visit what was the Majdanek concentration camp. My father was imprisoned there for a period of time. You can see a little bit of information about that. That was a vast forced labor camp. It's where many of the Warsaw Ghetto survivors were forced to go. And of course, there was a huge loss of life. On day 6 of the tour, we will visit the Woliska salt mine. My father was also imprisoned there. He was roughly sent from camp to camp. And it's actually, and I'll talk about miracles shortly, it was actually a miracle that he was sent to different camps versus being killed in any one of them. And I'll explain how that came to be. The Woliska salt mine, as you may know, is outside of Krakow, Poland. It was an underground arms factory for the Nazis. They stopped as soon as the Soviets got too close. Several thousand Jewish slave laborers were forced to work there. Many people don't know that's also where the Nazis stored some of their invaluable paintings and plundered riches that they stole from the countries that they invaded. So many of those things were in fact kept in the salt mine. My father was liberated in 1945. He was actually on a forced march in Stammsried, Germany, which is in the Bavarian portion of Germany. He had survived the different camps that I mentioned that he went through, and I'll also describe some of the other things that he survived. And so he got to this point where the Nazis and the Ukrainian guards who were guarding the prisoners got the mayor of Stammsried to come out to the town square, and they debated about what to do with these Jewish survivors. Should they kill them on the spot? And of course, many wanted to kill them. And in one of the miracles, which I'll describe in more detail later, my father describes how he saw coming over the hills outside of Stammsried American tanks with the white star, as you can see on this photo, and it was part of Patton's army. So they were rescued at the last second, and the Germans and the Ukrainian guards ran into the woods. And according to history, not a shot was fired when the Allies liberated Stammsried. Okay, so about the book, you can see I take a cinematic lens. looking at history, folklore, horror, heroes, and the superheroes. Even though I delve into the topics of horror movies and horror stories, as well as hero and superhero stories, that either reflected what was happening in the world at that time or forecasted what was going to happen. Obviously, none of these made-up stories can compare with the real horror that was the Holocaust, and I make that very clear in the book. I talk about the innocents, especially Poland prior to World War II. They were not good times in the sense that people didn't have enough food, they didn't have enough medical care, but it wasn't yet the Holocaust. So it was a simpler time. It was a better time from that perspective. And then I talk about the antagonists, again, the Nazis and the allies of the Nazis who persecuted not only the Jews, but many other people. And the protagonists, again, the people who were suffering, but also the allies, the allied nations who fought against the Nazis. Again, you can see understanding the tenets again is my premise, that we need to understand good and evil, angels and demons, monsters, miracles, to fully understand why the Holocaust happened and to stop it from happening again. And then the latter portion of the book, I talk about from my perspective how we can stop the Holocaust from happening again. I'll just pause for a second and say, when I keep saying things like monsters and angels and demons, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, it's important to recognize that the Jews, the Poles, the Germans, all had beliefs in monsters and angels. The Germans, you may know, thought that they were descended from werewolves. They considered werewolves to be honorable creatures. They actually named many of their submarines. They called their submarine fleet a wolf pack. Many of the individual submarines they named after individual wolves. They considered the Jews and other undesirables or Untermenschen, they considered them to be vampires draining the blood of the fatherland of Germany. And Hitler and the Nazis were big believers in supernatural thinking, finding magical weapons and other things, which I'll describe in more detail. I won't read this to you. This was a review of the book that comes actually out of France. I'll just leave that up for a second. The tour, again, Daniel will talk more about the tour later. The tour dates are August 25th to September 4th, again, coinciding with the 85th anniversary of the Nazis' invasion. And the tour roughly follows the themes in the book, primarily focusing on many of the cities and other locations that I've mentioned that we'll visit, and Daniel will mention others that we'll visit, but also the overarching supernatural, paranormal, folkloric beliefs of the Jews, the Poles, the Germans, and how it ties into, and as I argue in the book, how it brought about the Holocaust, and in my view. And I talk about how, and again, in my research, Europe in general has been a long bastion of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism has been around for at least 2,000 years, really since the time of Jesus and when the Jews did not go along with Christianity. And that started, obviously, anti-Semitism through the millennia, with some people believing that Jews caused the Black Plague, or blood libel rights, where the Jews were somehow stealing the blood of Christians, and other outlandish, outrageous beliefs. But these beliefs, these superstitions, this folklore fed into what led to the Holocaust. And I talk in the book about other things, that German children were raised on stories by the Brothers Grimm, two German authors you may know. If you've ever seen a Disney movie or gone to any of the Disney parks, many of the Brothers Grimm stories in a much sanitized, cleaned up version make appearances. But that's not the way the stories were originally. Many of them were anti-Semitic, and that's what German children were raised on, were these horrible stories, which lent themselves to believing that the Jews were monsters. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to mention. I do talk in the book about the various books and movies that have been written. I talk about how the Jews have searched for super weapons throughout our existence. The Ark of the Covenant, in which the Ten Commandments were carried, If you've ever heard of or seen the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, that's what that whole theme was about, was finding the super weapon. The trumpets of Joshua, the clay figure, the golem, which was created in medieval days by a rabbi with the belief or the thought that the golem would somehow protect the Jewish community from evil outside sources. Some people believe that Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein in 1818, got the idea from the golem. So I explore those different things. I also explore the superheroes, which I'll talk about in just on the next slide. So this busy slide, I know that there's a lot in it. I was trying to reflect what the different superstitions and folkloric beliefs of Jews are. And I'll just go through them quickly. The top left, salt. That's been the belief for hundreds of years that somehow salt wards off evil and bad spirits. And so it was not uncommon for Jews to sprinkle salt in the corners of their rooms and their houses to ward off evil spirits. And that cuts across, it's not just a Jewish thing, it cuts across many different cultures. There's many different movies and shows that describe how salt keeps ghosts away and things like that. Captain America is the next one over to the right. You may or you may not know that that was a creation in 1941 by a Jewish American cartoonist trying to get the United States to go to war with Nazi Germany. So the Captain America figure was a Jewish creation. It's a part of Jewish folklore. Working our way over to the right, Wonder Woman, another popular figure from just the last 5 to 10 years, but has been around really since the 1940s. Actually arose in 1912 by a Jewish author's book called The Superwoman. So again, that's another Jewish creation. To the right of that is the Hand of Miriam. It's a talisman. It's a good luck charm thought to ward off the eye of the evil eye. Then if we go down to the next level down, that's the Ark of the Covenant, in which the 10 Commandments were carried and thought to hold great power and be able to protect the Jews against our enemies. Superman, again, another American Jewish cartoonist creation. Again, similar reason to Captain America, trying to spur America to go to war against Nazi Germany in the 1940s. I talk about the belief in angels and miracles, or Nez, as it's called. Bottom left, there's been a belief by Jews and others that metal is somehow a good luck charm and wards off evil. It was not uncommon in the early 20th century for Jews in Poland and elsewhere to attach safety pins and other metal pins and needles to loved ones' clothing to ward off evil. And thread. My father was a tailor, and he was always chewing on thread. I never understood why, but part of the Jews' folklore is that chewing on thread somehow keeps evil spirits away. It's thought it goes back to the times when people were buried in shrouds. So if you chew on thread, somehow that would keep from being buried in a shroud, and other reasons. Lilith, over to the next, is an early demon from the Jewish Bible, preceded Eve in Genesis. And again, this reflects the Jews and others' beliefs in demons and evil. The sneeze, you may know there's lots of history to the sneeze, that the biblical Jacob in Genesis is said to have sneezed and died instantly. So that's part of the reason why it's thought as soon as people sneeze, they say, God bless you, or Gesundheit, or to again ward off evil. The golem is the next one over to the right. I've already described that. That's a clay figure, inanimate clay figure that a Jewish rabbi created to protect the Jewish community in medieval days. And then finally on the far right is the blackbird. And the blackbird has been thought of as being evil, or the sign of evil, since the Bible. And I probably will mention that my father, one of the miracles he had when he was in one of the slave labor camps was he had a dream of fighting a blackbird and winning. And he woke up the next morning and he was very sick, and he couldn't go on the forced march that the Nazis were forcing the Jews to go on. Those who went on the forced march were all killed. He survived because he was sick and he couldn't go on the march. And he told another elderly prisoner about his dream, and the prisoner said, "You fought evil and won." So that's the reflection of fighting that blackbird. Okay, day 3 of the tour, we will visit the Zofielka Jewish Psychiatric Hospital. There's lots of folklore and haunted tales attached to this facility. You may or you may not know it's in the forest of Otwock, Poland. That's in the early 20th century. Jewish psychiatric patients were treated there. When the Nazis came in 1942, they killed the doctors and many of the patients. Other patients were forced to go to Majdanek and other concentration camps. And then they used this facility for their Lebensborn initiative, where they were trying to turn young Polish children into good German children. So it was called Germanization or Lebensborn. So that's one of the sites that we would be visiting. The Radom Village Museum, that's day 4 of the tour. The idea here is because we talk so much about early folklore of the Poles and the Jews and others, this is a reflection of what life was like in the late 1800s, early 1900s, a simple life, and they have folkloric festivals, a bread festival, a potato festival, traditional dances. We're going to visit the Rhineck Underground Museum in Krakow on day 5 of the tour. The connection here is that the Poles, it's thought that many of the stories of vampires, and again, the Nazis believed the Jews and others were vampires sucking the blood of the fatherland. The Poles, this is where many of the stories originated about vampires, was in Poland and other Slavic countries. And so there were a number of bodies unearthed underneath the Krakow market square, which it's believed people thought they were vampires. Their heads were cut off, placed between their knees. Rocks were placed in their mouths. They were placed under stones. Again, it was thought this was the way that you buried what you thought was a vampire so they couldn't come back and haunt the living. And so in this museum, there are a number of these bodies that are there. And that's a tie-in to, again, these folkloric vampire-like beliefs that the Poles had. Days 8 and 9 of the tour, we will visit Berlin. On the left-hand side, I have a photo of early 20th century Berlin. It was said to be a beautiful, thriving cultural capital, rivaling Paris. And of course, by the end of the war, it was in rubble, it was in ruins. 2.8 of the original pre-war 4.3 million people still lived there, so the population was greatly decreased. 60% of the city's buildings were destroyed. So, but obviously Berlin has come back, and we will have a chance to visit that. Let me check how I'm doing time-wise. Am I doing okay time-wise? Yeah.
Oh, good.
Okay. Am I going too fast by any chance, or am I you still with me?
Oh, it's great.
Okay.
It's great. Keep going.
Okay. So on this slide, this is actually a photograph of my mother, who again joined the U.S. Navy Waves, which was an organization within the U.S. Navy made up of women who wanted to serve the country. And so I spent a little bit of time in the book talking about my mother. Her story wasn't so much the focus because she was born in the United States, but I talk about how she lived through the Great Depression and how that shaped who she was, and how she saw what was happening again in Europe to her fellow Jews, and how she had to do something. And even though her parents forbid her from joining the military, and many parents didn't want their young daughters joining the military, she waited till she was 21 years old and legally could join on her own, and she did. And she served in the U.S. Navy. And that was really one of the highlights of her life. And in the book, I talk about how, to me, again, my parents were my heroes. My mother, I describe her as a living angel. Many of us probably feel the same way about our parents and maybe our mothers. But she was a true practitioner of the golden rule, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. And so in the book, I talk about how I believe that she was one of the forces of good that my father survived, the nightmares he survived to get to. Okay, a time of superheroes. Again, in the book, I talk about how Jews made up large numbers of US troops and Allied troops that fought against the Nazis. There were 550,000 Jews in the American military in World War II. There were 1 million Jews in the militaries of other Allied countries. So we made up a good percentage of the troops fighting against the Nazis. I talk about how the US produced vast amount of weapons and equipment. But America also, and I mentioned earlier, sent other super weapons to war against the Nazis, to include these superheroes. And it might seem kind of silly to us today, these sort of made up cartoon-like characters, but they were a great source of pride in the United States, and they were created by Jewish American cartoonists to, again, cause America to go to war against Nazi Germany. And I already mentioned to you the sources of these different figures. Jack Kirby created Captain America, Jerry Siegel created Superman, and Miriam Michelson created Wonder Woman. So all Jewish Americans. Okay. Anti-Semitism has been called the longest hatred. Again, it's been a form of hatred that has existed for at least 2,000 years. And I talk again in the book, again, about where I think anti-Semitism came from. Again, I mentioned earlier the separation between the Jews and the early Christians, and then how Jews have been blamed for so many of the nightmares that have befallen humans since then. And I won't go through them again. But again, the premise is that we need to understand this underlying hatred, where it came from, the stereotypes, the conspiracy theories, the blood libel, the pogroms in Eastern Europe, to really understand how it evolved into something as horrific as the Holocaust. The protagonists, again, this is my father in the late 1940s. My father actually went, I think I have a photograph coming up, I went back to Germany with my mother and father in the 1990s. My father was interested in visiting Germany. He would not go to Poland because he felt as though the greatest betrayal of the Jews in Poland was by their Polish neighbors, who, again, the Jews lived for 1,000 years in Poland and were at least friendly, if not friends, with their neighbors in Poland. But when the Nazis came in 1939, many, not all, many of the Poles turned against the Jews, and my father felt that was a major betrayal. So he refused to go to Poland. We know from history that there were a number of people who displayed heroism and courage, including Poles who hid Jews, Germans who hid Jews, and others. But the reality that my father and other Holocaust survivors lived through, Poles turning on them, was something he couldn't get past. Okay, kind of silly pictures, but again, horror on the left-hand side of your screen is supposed to be a vampire, and on the right-hand side is a werewolf. Again, I already mentioned the Nazis thought of the Jews as being vampires, and the Nazis thought of themselves as being descended from werewolves. And again, I talk in the book about the various movies. On the left-hand side, that particular vampire looks like Nosferatu, which you might know was one of the earliest horror movies made. It was made by Germany. And it's said that the vampire that they created, Count Orlok, was intended to look like a Jew, with what they described as, you can see the features, the longer nose and other things like that. And so, again, it would be easy to say, well, this is just made up stuff, but these were real beliefs that fed into what became the Holocaust. There was another movie made in 1941 called The Wolf Man. Again, it was an American movie about the werewolf. And the screenplay was actually written by a Jewish refugee from Nazi Germany. His name was Kurt Siodmak. And it's thought that the story of the werewolf, the wolf man, was his actually reflecting on his experiences in Nazi Germany and escaping. So, so many connections between these horror stories and these movies and what actually occurred. I've already described how the Germans were big into supernatural thinking. They were constantly searching for things like death rays. They were big believers in astrology, paranormal, paganism, Indo-Aryan mythology, witchcraft, miracle weapons, the lost kingdom of Atlantis, Norse frost giants, which some people say that Hitler sent Nazi troops to Russia and colder climates with inadequate clothing because he wanted to prove how the Nazi troops were so much like the frost giants and could withstand the cold. Of course, he was very wrong, and they couldn't withstand the cold. And then the Thule Society, you might know, was a Nazi occultist group, which forced people who were becoming members of the Thule Society to make a blood declaration, swearing that they had no Jewish or colored blood. And again, these themes, the supernatural thinking really permeates. Hitler himself, you might know, thought of himself as a cinematic hero. Before giving his speeches, he would pose in front of mirrors and cameras. And of course, so many of his speeches and the propaganda was tied into the folklore, the anti-Semitic folklore, and to get the people to believe that the Jews were something less than human. And unfortunately, Hitler was somewhat successful in that. Germany has been thought of as having a militaristic past long before World War II. This is an American poster dating back to World War I. Beat back the Hun. The Germans were called the Hun. You might know that the Hun, that's actually a derogatory phrase or word referring to Asian nomadic tribes of the 4th and 6th century, which were thought to be barbaric. So that's why the Germans were called Huns, because they were thought to be barbaric. They were the first users of poison gas and other things in World War I. In this country, and again, I'm in America, I'm on the west coast of America, just south of Seattle, Washington. A big folkloric story in this country was from 1820 called The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. I don't know if you've heard of the Headless Horseman, but the Headless Horseman, who supposedly fought against the Americans in the Revolutionary War on the part of the British as a Hessian German soldier, was thought to be German. And so that was one of the first examples of how the Germans were thought of as being a barbaric people. In the book, I talk about how in so many of these conflicts, but especially the Holocaust and World War II, evil at first appears to be insurmountable, undefeatable. The Nazis were all powerful, and all that seemed to be hanging in the balance against the Nazis, at least at first, was Great Britain and Winston Churchill hanging on until America and others came in. Of course, Poland was one of the first countries to be invaded. France was defeated. But I talk about how even though evil seems all-powerful and insurmountable at first, good won out and hope won out. And that's really the theme of the book, is despite the horrible things that happened, good things happened in the end. Hope won out. And in my father's case, he experienced miracles, which allowed him to survive. So speaking of miracles, on the bottom right-hand side is actually a photograph of my mother and father in the 1980s. They were visiting Disney World in America. And I won't go through all the miracles, but I'll just quickly touch on a few of them. Again, he experienced what I call 11 miracles in surviving the Holocaust. In one case, he and one of his sisters were trying to escape the Warsaw Ghetto. They were trying to get onto a train to get out of Warsaw. And a Polish man came up to them and said, "Give me all your money." He knew that they were Jews. My father tricked him and said, "Come back tomorrow and I'll have money for you." Well, of course, the man went away and my father and his sister escaped, and there was no tomorrow. So he was able to trick this man. In another case, in another experience trying to board a train, a woman saw my father and his sister and started yelling, "There's a Jew, there's a Jew." And my father was able to convince the conductor on the train that he didn't want the problems that would come from getting the Gestapo and the Nazis involved. So they let my father and sister move on and keep traveling. I mentioned earlier the dream about fighting a large blackbird. At one point in one of the camps, and my father again was imprisoned in at least 5 concentration and slave labor camps. I probably didn't mention all of them. But at one point, they were separating out who would live and who would die. My father and his whole family were tailors and seamstresses. And so when it came time for the Germans to say, "What is it that you do for a living?" In other words, shall we kill you or not kill you? Somehow my father got it into his mind to say, "I'm a sheet and metal worker," which he had no experience working with sheet and metal. And of course, the Nazis spared him, because they thought, well, we can use this guy to work on our Messerschmitt or Henkel fighter aircraft, and they spared my father. So again, another miracle, as my father described it. Another time in another camp, a guard, a particularly brutal guard, and I talk at some length about the brutality in these camps and what my father lived through and saw. One of these camp guards was named Fritz, and told my father that he had to give, my father had to give him his lunch for the next several days, or he would kill my father. Somehow, and again by a miracle, Fritz was let off by other Germans for moonshining, making illegal alcohol at the camp, never to be seen again, and my father survived again.
Father told them to do some work they had no idea how to do, so they spared him.
I'm sorry, I can't hear if someone is talking.
You can keep going, don't worry.
Okay. Another miracle. My father described how he was riding in a cattle car, which was not uncommon. That was the way that many times the Germans would transport the prisoners. And he was on the bottom of the car, the bottom of the cattle car, with other prisoners on top and on upper level. And British, English fighter jets strafed or shot into the train, killing the people on the top of the train. And again, my father and others survived. A horrible story with a great deal of death, but somehow my father survived, and described how that happened. Getting close to the end here. My father described being on a forced march from one of the camps. He could feel his legs weakening, but he said that he heard a voice say, "Kittmacher," our family's last name, "Kittmacher, don't stop here." And anyone who was stopping was immediately shot by the Nazis. My father knew that no one knew his last name, or at least he thought no one knew his last name, so he didn't know who was talking to him, but he listened to the voice and he kept on marching, and he survived. And then I described one of the other ones, which was in the town of Stamsried in Germany, when he was going to be killed along with the prisoners, how the American army came literally over the hill and saved the day and saved the prisoners. So there were other miracles. There were a total of 11, but I'll stop there. In the latter part of the book, I talk about how my thoughts are to stop another Holocaust from happening. And it's mainly about understanding where hatred comes from. That's why, again, my main premise is we should understand where these superstitions and this hatred and this anti-Semitism came from, and why it existed and why it took such a strong hold. I talk about how we should have an open society, education. We should practice the golden rule, do unto others as we'd have them do unto us. We should never forget, obviously, what happened is a common refrain about the Holocaust. We should overcome, or we need to overcome, folklore and anti-Semitism and conspiracy theories, which, as I said earlier, were in great existence in the early 20th century, and unfortunately, we're living through a period of time where they've made another rise, and they're existing. And I do talk about how in times of economic turmoil, extremism, mistrust of outsiders, a heavy-handed immigration approach, dehumanization of those that we consider to be different. And then we also have social media and multimedia, which I think exacerbates the problems. But in times of crisis and uncertainty, conspiracy theories thrive. So somehow we have to get back to a more stable time. And I argue that one of the ways to do that is to better understand where this hatred comes from. And that's it. So I did that in 40 minutes. I was aiming for 45. So, but of course, if anyone has any questions, or Dora, however you'd like to do it, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Ira. Thank you for sharing about your book and your parents' stories. It was wonderful. I mean, as scary, but scary and wonderful to listen to it at the same time. And thank you so much. Yeah, well, there is a big discussion on the chat. I'm just going to quickly try to ask your opinion about it. So there was a question like, what do you think that in the past, a lot of the times anti-Semitism rose from more right-wing ideologies, and today some people feel that it's rising more from a left-wing or progressive ideology? If you have an explanation where that kind of hatred comes from.
That's an excellent question. And in my research, I think a lot of the early history of anti-Semitism was from what I would call the more right-wing element or right-wing groups. Certainly Nazi Germany was right-wing, although they had the word socialist in their title. They weren't really socialists. It was more of a autocratic country. And it is, I think, a unique feature of where we are right now in history that we seem to be seeing anti-Semitism not only from the right wing, but also from the left wing. And again, I live in the US in Washington State, and every Friday night there's a protest a mile and a half from where I live of people chanting Israel out of Gaza, and they are more the left wing. So I think I don't know of any precedent that I can think of historically to explain how the left or more correct and progressive peoples are now appearing to show what could be perceived as anti-Semitic. I say perceived because so many people are not coming out and saying we hate Jews like the Nazis and other right-wing people have said. It's more of a focus on Israel, get out of Gaza. And but I think that it's impossible to separate the two. I think that they are very closely linked. So I think this is a particularly unique feature of the history that we're living through right now. And I, like probably so many of you, are hoping that we get back to a more stable time and that things will calm down. But it is a unique time, as far as I know, in history where both the right and the left wings seem to be taking this approach.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that. We have time for one or two more questions. So if anyone would like to ask something about the book, then please feel free to write it in the chat. I just want to also give a voice to the comments that were coming in when you were speaking about the Jewish superstitions, that so many people recognized some of the customs and superstitions you mentioned from their own family. So that's just an interesting point that I wanted to mention that were coming in on the comments.
And I didn't mention that Judaism has a prohibition against supernatural thinking. Early in the Bible, it talks about we will have no witches, and yet so much of the folklore and the beliefs and superstitions of Jews, as well as other people, tie into those kinds of things. So.
Thank you. And another question, how did you choose to take a cinematic lens versus a strictly historical approach?
That's another very good question. In writing the book, and again, we'd have to go back in time to 2019. COVID was just hitting. Many of us probably weren't going anyplace. We were stranded in our houses, and I had time to start working on this book, and then it's one of 6 books that I've written. But I decided early on that I wanted to take an approach that maybe was a more unique approach. The Holocaust has been discussed and written about in other ways. And there are some books that touch on the supernatural beliefs of the Nazis and others. But I wanted to take it from a different angle, a different perspective, more of a unique perspective. And I have an interest, because all the books I've written focus on this folklore and these beliefs. I wanted to introduce that into the whole analysis of where the Holocaust came from. And the bottom line is that, to me, the Holocaust is not a standalone event. It's something that was preceded by 2,000 years of anti-Semitism and hatred, and was truly fed into by these folkloric stories of the Nazis and others about these monsters and demons. And then the fact that in order to get the United States and other countries to go to war, Jewish cartoonists were creating superheroes. I think those are all just relevant features of what happened with the Holocaust and with World War II.
Thank you very much. So I don't see now more questions, so I think I will pass the word to Daniel. So thank you very much, Ira. I just want to point out that Ira is also going on this trip that Danielle is going to introduce to us. Danielle has presented many times on Kesher about Lithuania and about Riga in Latvia. He's the co-founder of Jerulita, and he's also an excellent tour guide showing around Jewish heritage in the Baltic states, in Poland, and now in Germany as well. So we're very happy to cooperate with him as well. So he's going to share with you the details of the trip that they are planning that Ira already mentioned briefly, and now Daniel's going to tell you more about how it's going to go.
Yeah, thank you, Dora, and it's a pleasure to be here. And actually, there was one more question from Joe to Ira, and I think maybe we'll take one more minute.
Yes, sorry,
Give you your
I missed
father
this
or these
question.
events of his life, or were these events shared over time through your family life?
And I missed the first part of the question.
Did you interview your father for these
Oh.
events of his life, or were these events shared over time through your family life?
Okay, very good question. And I skipped over that part in an interest of trying to get through more quickly. My father was actually interviewed in 1994 by an initiative that was started by Steven Spielberg, an American director, who directed Schindler's List. I think it was 1991. And there were a number of initiatives started to try to capture the oral histories of the Holocaust by interviewing Holocaust survivors. So my father was interviewed for several hours as part of that initiative. And his interview is actually, it can be seen online from the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. It's stored there electronically. And if you look under his name, so it's my same last name, but Albert Kittmacher, in the U.S. Holocaust Museum, you can see his full interview. But I also talked with him and interviewed him, or at least spoke with him many times over the years. And similarly with my mother and her experiences, and I didn't spend a lot of time on her experiences in World War II, but she was interviewed by the U.S. Women's War Memorial, it's called, in Washington, D.C., to try to capture the experience of American women who took part in World War II. So her interview is housed there, and of course I also spoke with her at great length, but that was a very good question.
Thank you, Ira.
I assume that you can see my screen. So it's really a pleasure to be here, and I really would like to thank Ira for the presentation and for the research you have done, and a different perspective you bring. I actually work with Holocaust tourism, or Jewish tourism, or Jewish heritage tourism, whatever title you choose. But in all of these titled kinds of tourism, well, you cannot avoid Holocaust, even if you try to concentrate on religion, heritage, culture. In any case, if people come to this part of the world, I'm based in Vilnius, Lithuania. We do tours in the Baltic states, in Poland. We used to go to Belarus and Russia before the war broke out there. So in any case, you touch the Holocaust. So the big question on these tours is the balance and the focus of the tour. And actually, as a professional guide myself, I always tried to show as many angles as possible. So when I learned about Ira's perspective, the cinematic perspective, I said, wow, it's such a brilliant idea to look at these historical tragedies, facts, beliefs from this interesting perspective. So when we made contacts with Ira, and he asked me whether I'm interested in organizing such a tour with a tour which will follow a book about his father. Well, I thought it's a brilliant idea. It's challenging idea because there are many angles you have to balance in order to make it a good service to the audience, and also to have a right audience for this tour. So actually, I'm really thrilled to participate in this project. So the title is simple: Jewish Heritage Tour to Poland and Germany. And of course, you can put under this title many things. And of course, it will be a balance of many things. Ira will join the tour, and there will be a guide from Poland, and there will be a guide from Germany who will take over. So different people will provide different sorts of information, and we have a cinematic perspective here, the idea of the cinematic perspective. And actually these several days tours, I usually think about them as participation in a movie. Like, you on board such a tour, you switch on your TV and you spend 1.5 hours, 2 hours watching a movie. Here you're on board on a tour, and for 9, 10, 11 days, you are in a movie. And if you have a good imagination, you feel yourself as part of what is happening. Now, speaking of the itinerary, so we have this itinerary, which some of you who visited the website already saw. This is a print screen from our website, and here are the dates for 24 and 25. And the letters B and D are for breakfast and dinner on that day. It's practical information. And this is a map of the tour. And actually, when Ira was speaking today about his father's tragic road in Poland and Germany, and the location where he was liberated, actually said that he went the same way thousands of other Jews went through. And I've been on such private tours where we followed exactly the fate of their families, going from one labor camp to another labor camp. Now, is this tour a pure Holocaust tour? No, of course not. Because when we will come to Warsaw, we'll speak about, about Poland, we'll speak about Warsaw, we'll speak about Poles, about Jews, about, other nationalities who lived in this multinational and multicultural, beautiful city. And it will be all constant ping pong between different, people who speak, two guides, different themes to discuss, different topics, hard topics, easier topics. So the tour itself is based on the transportation by a travel coach from place to place. These are drives through Polish and later on German countryside. So from Warsaw we move to Lublin, and then we have like a few longer drives. From Lublin to Krakow is quite a long drive, but in such a way you experience the territory. To take Ira's book, to sit by the fireplace at home with a cup of coffee is really great, yeah. But to take Ira's book and to stand on a Polish soil and to march through the Polish, to drive through the Polish soil, to be precise, and to move into the German soil, for me, it was perfect anti-reflection. Because what happened in the Second World War, armies went from Germany towards Moscow, like from west to the east. And after that, it took a lot of time to throw them back so they would retrieve back to Berlin. So actually our tour goes vice versa. Our tour starts in Poland and it ends up in Berlin. First of all, we thought together with Ira that we will have only the Polish tour, but after diving into more details, after putting more important places on the map, I said, why not finishing in Berlin? And it was pure coincidence that we are there 85 years. We hopefully will be there 85 years after the breakout of the war. Well, we were not looking for this one, but again, speaking of slightly different perspective, a little bit cinematic approach or beliefs, these things they make it slightly different. Now, a lecture is a good thing. A book is a beautiful thing, interesting thing, important thing. But when you combine all these things together and you touch the soil, this makes the difference. On my tours, there were people who were several times in Lithuania, Poland, other locations, in different circumstances and so on. And I always question them, like, what brings you for the second time to come to these places? And they always said, well, when you put together all the layers, you have this complicated picture of things. Well, this is a philosophy of tourism and philosophy of all the complicated things we mentioned previously in these talks. And probably I can talk for hours about that. So after Lublin, where we will visit, I will not go on this map. I will not follow like a lot of tour details, but the main sites like Warsaw, Lublin, which was very important Jewish city. From there, we'll visit some shtetls, former shtetls, Radom and Kielce. Kielce is infamous for the pogrom after the Second World War, when Poles continued to believe in all kinds of terrible things and made the pogrom against the Jews, blaming them for their tragedy during the Holocaust. After that, we reached the southern part of Poland, close to Tatra Mountains. We'll not go to Zakopane, Polish mountain resort, but we'll visit Velichka salt mines. And from there, we'll go to Auschwitz, which is on the map in Polish, Oswiecim. And from there, we'll drive to Wrocław and Berlin. So altogether is about 800 miles. Some technical things before we speak a little bit more about the program. I chose to offer 4-star hotels. They are nice in this part of the world. So I just pick up some pictures from the hotel. Well, these hotels are booked, and the guides in Poland and in Germany are booked. This tour is a reality. It's not something on the paper. And we do have a long list of people who are interested, including many participants of this talk. So this is the standard for the tour. It's not a deluxe, not a premium class hotels, but they are nice, clean, with good breakfasts. So these hotels are in Wrocław and in Berlin, a little bit more modern maybe than in Polish part. Now the tour itself, the price is 3,600 euros per person in a double room, and there is a single supplement of 650 euros. This information is available on the website, and the price includes all the land services. The only thing the price excludes is transatlantic flights for those who come from the United States or anybody who comes outside Poland. So as the tour is sold worldwide to anyone who wants to join, we could not offer a package with the flight, because all the flights can be different. So accommodation in 4-star hotels with breakfast. So we have 10 breakfasts and 3 dinners. And we also have a Kabbalat Shabbat dinner with the Jewish Community Center. It will be in Krakow. Of course, we'll be using a first-class travel coach for all the land transportation for these long drives. So actually, it will be one bus from Warsaw till the very end. It's convenient. People get friends with the driver, and they move together. Well, hopefully they do. We have local guides. We planned one guide for Poland and one guide for Germany. We have entrance fees to 27 museums, which may sound a lot, but actually we have 10 days of touring, and we have a lot of visiting places, and everything here becomes a museum. I assume that soon even high-tech companies also will become museums. People will charge money to enter and see around there. Maybe they already do that. So it sounds a lot, but it is nicely incorporated into the itinerary, and it's not like going from one museum to another museum. There are also entrances to 3 free of charge visiting places, and we will purchase the travel insurance for every participant. Answering some of your possible questions. Maybe I'll start from the red side. This is not a fun or relaxation tour because of its content. Because when you speak about the Jewish heritage in these territories, and if you travel with Ira's book in your pocket, well, no doubt we will speak about the difficult themes, and there will be discussions. Today we had a discussion in the chat, you know, and what I like about traveling with the groups of Jews, I feel like at home. You know, you say something and you have a discussion. You have 3 Jews, 25 opinions, a lot of information, and this is brilliant. Sometimes when I happen to travel with people who do not ask questions, it feels weird, like nobody is interested in what I'm saying, like no questions, no opinions. This is not a shopping tour. Well, you can always find shopping in Poland or Germany, but this is not the idea of the tour. This is not a kosher tour. We do run kosher tours with kosher food and no traveling, no bus traveling on Shabbat, but this is not the case. Well, few more things I wrote, more as a joke rather than information for you. So on the green side, so weather is perfect at this time of the year, end of August, beginning of September. Poland, Germany, the weather is perfect. It's not hot already. It's still not cold. Now, guided days are usually from morning till late afternoon, from 9 till 5, 6 p.m. If we have longer drives, can be longer. At the same time, we do care about our travelers, and there are breaks for coffee, for bathrooms, for lunch. So it's not a marathon. Quite a lot of walking in the old cities should be taken into the consideration. At the same time, usually participants of our tours are not very young, and so we take these things into the consideration. Now, of course, the content is very important. It's I would say the major highlight of Gerulita travel. We adore providing a rich historical, cultural heritage content to our clients, and that is what we are known for. Now, in terms of dinners, there are 10 breakfasts and 4 dinners, including the Kabbalat Shabbat dinner. So the rest is not included, and I think it's a good balance, because after being with the group for days, you can go on your own for your own dinner. Sit, digest things, discuss things with your partner, or with somebody from the group you decided to have dinner with. So I find it a good opportunity and not a drawback of the offered product. And the same time in the evenings is good for experiencing the atmosphere of the cities, walking around on your own in the central parts, and seeing how people live, what they eat, how they dress, how they laugh, and so on. So this is of course an integral part of every tour. Few words about the payment conditions. So currently we have a waiting list of a lot of people. We have over 30 people who filled in interest. I think it's even more, 30, maybe over 40 people who are interested in a tour, and we will send additional letter to you and to other people who filled in the form. And when we have a minimum of 12 people, the tour is confirmed. When we have 24 people, maximum 26 people, we will close the registration and the tour will be sold out. So we require 10% deposit, which is like 360 euros, and it's a refundable deposit. If we cancel the tour, we will return the deposit. But actually, we prefer even not to take a deposit if we do not have enough people interested. We really are not interested in sending the money back and forth. And of course, if something happens, like when the cancellation is like 100%, which means like no refund, for this we purchase insurance on your behalf, so you will not lose your money if something happens and you have to cancel. Now, any questions on this technical part?
The only question I saw was something that you already touched upon, but a bit more specific, that would you recommend this to people in their 70s? Or is it too exhausting?
No, this is, well, of course, it's very individual, but as a matter of fact, we travel during the day, we do not come back to the hotel. Sometimes there are people who physically cannot do that. So they say, okay, I'll participate in a group, but I'll skip the afternoons. It happens, but you have to take into the consideration that, for example, if on that day we drive from place to place, it's impossible. No, you cannot go back to the hotel. Is it high intensity tour? No, I wouldn't say so. The most difficult part is walking and listening, walking and talking in the old city. Also, like visiting Auschwitz Museum, it's quite difficult. I would like to go to Lodz and Bialystock talk before the tour. Yeah, we can arrange the pre-tour or post-tour. Yeah, it was a direct message from Elaine. Yeah, but I will already touch that if I saw. Yeah.
Okay. And if there are more than one tours each year, that was another question.
No,
only the
now at the moment, with IRA, we have planned this August, September, and next tour in April 2025. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't see no more questions at the moment, so you can continue with the.
So I still have few slides with pictures of these places. I understand that today in the era of internet, everybody saw or possibly saw pictures, but still I chose few pictures to show you how does that look like, you know. I find it very useful that Ira picked all the pictures of these locations, pictures which are related to the Holocaust period. But these are newer pictures. For example, here on the right, you can see a picture from the Polin Museum. This is a reconstruction of a wooden synagogue with the decorations on the ceiling and on the bima and so on. And here on the left, you have at the top left, you have a picture of Nożyk Synagogue in Warsaw, beautiful active synagogue for Warsaw Jewish community, which we'll be visiting. And of course, the square of the old city. You know, Warsaw was wiped out, and Poles made an amazing effort to reconstruct the city, to rebuild the city after the Second World War, and it took them time. The citizens donated money for the reconstruction of the city, and it's really a miracle that there is an old city in Warsaw, because it was absolutely destroyed. The percentage of Warsaw destruction is 87, I think. Lublin. In Lublin, two pictures: the old city and Majdanek concentration camp. Again, the paradox. In the same location, you have a beautiful old city, decorations, restaurants, everything. If you drive 10 minutes from there, you find yourself in the outskirts of the city, in the concentration camp museum / memorial, and there is a residential area around that. So somebody drives to work every day looking at the Majdanek concentration camp. So this is one of the 2 concentration camps we are visiting on this tour. Krakow, I would say the pearl of Poland, beautiful city, young city with a huge Jagiellonian University, a lot of tourist attractions here under the word Krakow on the right. You see the Sukienice trading roads, and I also mentioned the underground museum there with interesting artifacts. You can see the entrance on the left. You can see the entrance to one of the synagogues in the Jewish district, which is called Kazimierz. And I also decided that not only buildings are important, but also Polish food has a right to be on this presentation as well. From Krakow, we'll go to Auschwitz. These are famous pictures from Auschwitz. The train tracks through which people were brought to this location. Well, of course, it's a memorial museum. We will have a local guide there. They almost do not allow not licensed guides giving tours there. So today, Auschwitz is so busy. They have over 1.3 million visitors a year. So you have to buy not only the date, ticket for the certain day, you have to buy ticket for the certain day and time. And if you're late 15 minutes, you have no tour. So we better be on time. From Krakow, we continue to Wrocław on the way to Germany. Wrocław is actually pretty much a German city with German history, German Jewish history, Polish history. Interesting city which gets more and more beautiful every year. First time I was there like 15 years ago, maybe more, and it has really changed, developed from the travel perspective, and of course we'll find a lot of interesting things to see there. And we will finish. Well, not finish. We'll continue to Berlin, Brandenburg Gate, a lot of German history, and I find it's very important, coming to Berlin from the east. I repeat myself. I've mentioned that at the beginning of my part of the presentation. So it's I would like us to feel maybe not like Russian soldiers, but to feel like Jews who were liberated, Jews who survived the war. Well, actually, there were quite a lot, as Ira mentioned, there were quite a lot of Jews in the army of Allies and also on the American side. So maybe somebody will imagine himself as a Jewish soldier and as a Jewish hero, liberator, and so on. So, and of course, we'll dive into modern Berlin, into historical Berlin, into political Berlin. Germany is an empire today in Europe, very important country with its own difficulties. So, of course, we'll not skip that. We'll present this information, present the inside view of local guide from Germany, from Berlin, on all what's going on today in Europe and in Germany. And the last day, short drive to Potsdam, very controversial because it's a beautiful area of Wannsee Lake and palaces, German history, and Wannsee Villa, and infamous conference, which was on January 20th or 22nd, 1942, and the discussion about the ways to fulfill the final solution. So all these things together, they create a picture of what world was once there and what was destroyed and what is left today, and how today it became tourism highlights of Germany and Poland. Yeah, I think this is it. This was the last slide. But if you have questions, I have a lot of pictures and a lot of information to pull out of the sleeve.
Thank you so much, Daniel. So yeah, it's definitely you made it very visible what's going to come, and thank you for sharing all these beautiful pictures. So there's a question if you do private tours.
Yeah, we do private tours as well.
So of course, in tomorrow's follow-up email, as always, we will include the important information that you need to know after today's session. So we will include a link to Ira's book. We will also include a link to the full information of the trip and Daniel's contact information. So you will be able to be in touch and ask specific questions or register the tour if you're interested. So you will receive all this tomorrow, and of course the recording of this presentation as well. There was another question if you ever visit Pabianice, if I'm not pronouncing it wrong, near Łódź.
No, I haven't been there.
Okay, so these are the two questions I saw now. I think you covered a lot of ground in your presentation, so the most important questions were answered while you were speaking. But if anyone has more questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or unmute. Maybe I will take off now the presentation, unless Daniel, you want to keep showing pictures.
No, that's okay. Sorry, I froze.
Because that's also a possibility that while we wait, if anyone has any other questions, you can also show us some more pictures if you'd like.
I would like to, I'd like to thank Daniel. I think he's done an exceptional job in putting together the tour, and it really, I feel very positive about it, and it really does a great service to the book and to the whole theme. And then also, Daniel, you mentioned several times the word cinematic, and I purposely chose that term. My publisher, which is Amsterdam Publishers, is the largest publisher of Holocaust memoirs in the world. The publisher actually asked me early on, are you sure you want to use the word cinematic? And I said, yes, because to me, the way that this world history played out, the way the Holocaust played out, with all the influences of these folkloric tales that German children were raised with all the movies and the books that reflected not only the anxieties and the realities of what happened, it really did play out in a cinematic way. So I think that, Daniel, thank you for focusing on that word. That was purposeful on my part to use that word and to really make it feel like we were going back in time and what were people experiencing in the lead up to what happened as they were going through it and since then. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I actually also was thinking when you started the presentation, I recollected after one of our conversations, I went to my library. Well, I have a collection of books written by people about their parents who survived the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. Some of these books are like very simple, short books written for the family, like to preserve the interview, to preserve some of the information. Some of the books are more professional, like yours, but well, it's almost the whole shelf of books. You know, we collected together with my team through over 20 years of working with the Jewish audience, and it actually gave me an idea to come back to these books. Some of them I've read, some of them are just good souvenirs from our clients, but it's really emotional theme, and well, the information probably I will not read any new information because the stories, they are very much the same, but it's really fascinating to have all that on the bookshelf.
Very true.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Daniel and Ira, for sharing with us this really, really special tour. And of course, thank you, Ira, for sharing the wonderful book and the content and the stories. Since there are no more questions now, I think we will close for today. I think it was just a lot of information and everyone is still processing, and they will receive all the follow-up resources. And I'm sure that if anyone has more questions, then they will be in touch with you. So thank you very much for presenting to us, and thank you everyone for joining us for this presentation. And you will hear from us tomorrow with the follow-up resources and the recording.
Yeah, and I would like to thank Dora and Sebastian. You have created a unique platform for people who are interested in all the things you present. So I'm really glad we made friends, and you invite me for giving speeches here.
Thank you, Daniel. We're happy to invite you. And if anyone hasn't seen Daniel's talk, I'm sure we'll feature him soon again. He does amazing lectures also online, so please make sure to join him next time. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Ira, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.